Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
Welcome to your deep dive on the Lean Startup.
Okay.
We're going to be taking excerpts from Eric Ries's book and really kind of dig into the juicy bits for you.
Yeah, it's about navigating that messy world of creating something new. Especially when you're not quite sure what the right thing to build even is.
Right. So we've got excerpts covering the basic principles, some pretty surprising examples of how companies have used this, and even how it's been applied in the U.S. government.
Yeah, we'll unpack the core ideas, highlight the unexpected stuff, and then try to make it really practical for you, whatever you're working on.
Perfect. One of the things that really jumped out at me was this idea that entrepreneurship isn't just about a certain type of personality. Ries says it's actually a management method, applicable pretty much everywhere.
It is. It's about approaching any new project, whether you're launching a business, a product, or even just trying a new initiative at work.
With a specific set of tools and principles.
So it's less about being a risk taker and more about having a system for dealing with risk. Exactly. And a huge part of that system is what Ries calls validated learning. It's not enough to just have a great idea. You have to test your assumptions, get feedback from the real world, and use data to guide your decisions.
That makes sense. I can see how just relying on intuition could lead you down the wrong path.
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like this. Instead of going with your gut, you're essentially running experiments, like a scientist in a lab, to see what actually works.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? What does one of these experiments look like in the real world?
Well, that's where the build, measure, learn feedback loop comes in. This is the heart of the lean startup method.
From what I skimmed in the book, it involves creating a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Right. An MVP is the simplest version of your product that you can put in front of real customers to get feedback. It doesn't have to be perfect or even fully functional. The point is to learn as quickly as possible.
Ries gave this fascinating example of how Intuit, the company behind TurboTax, used this approach to become more innovative. They actually created these small autonomous teams that could quickly test out new ideas.
Yeah. It's almost like they injected a little bit of that startup energy inside a big corporation. They went from a slow, traditional development process to one that embraces rapid experimentation and iteration.
That's really interesting. So it's not just for startups. Even big companies can benefit from thinking this way.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? In today's world, things change so fast that the ability to adapt quickly is essential for any organization, big or small.
Now, another thing that really surprised me was this idea that Ries calls the audacity of zero. He says it can actually be easier to get resources when you have zero revenue than when you have a small amount.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but think about it from an investor's perspective. When you have zero revenue, it's all potential. People can project their own hopes and dreams onto your vision.
So you're more of a blank canvas.
Exactly. But as soon as you have even a small amount of revenue, suddenly everyone starts scrutinizing your numbers and questioning your growth potential.
So the takeaway here is don't be afraid to start small.
Exactly. It's better to launch with a basic MVP and gather data than to wait until you have the perfect product.
I like that. This next part is a little hard to swallow. But Ries also talks about the importance of being willing to throw away your work. Even if you've put months of effort into something, if customer feedback tells you it's not working, you need to be willing to pivot.
Yeah, it can be painful, for sure. But Ries emphasizes that clinging to a failing idea is even more costly in the long run.
He actually shares his own experience with this at IMVU, where he had to scrap months of work when it became clear their initial product wasn't resonating with users.
Wow.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of an idea that's not working and try something else. Speaking of trying something new, he also talks about the importance of starting small to validate a big idea, using the example of Zappos.
Right. It's hard to imagine now, but they actually started by just taking pictures of shoes in local stores and posting them online to see if anyone would buy them.
No fancy website, no warehouses full of inventory, just a simple experiment to test a big idea.
And that's what the lean startup is all about. Finding creative ways to validate your assumptions before you invest a ton of time and money.
So before you go building that whole shoe empire, You test the waters by seeing if people even want to buy shoes online.
Exactly. And if those early experiments show promise, then you can start building the infrastructure to support that demand.
Okay, so we've talked about testing assumptions and starting small, but how do we figure out which assumptions are the most important to test?
That's where the concept of leap of faith assumptions comes in. These are the fundamental beliefs about your business or your project that must be true for it to succeed.
So for Zappos, a leap of faith assumption might have been that people were actually comfortable buying shoes without trying them on first.
Exactly. And the lean startup method encourages you to identify these assumptions early on and then design experiments to test them.
And these experiments often involve getting out of the building, right? Actually talking to potential customers and getting real-world feedback.
That's a crucial part of it. You can't build a successful product or service by sitting in an office and making guesses about what people want.
Makes sense. You need to actually observe how people behave.
Yeah.
And what their needs are.
And Ries talks about different approaches to building MVPs to do just that. For example, there's the concierge MVP, where you manually provide the service to a small group of customers, like in the Zappos example.
So instead of building a whole e-commerce platform, you just take the orders and fulfill them yourself to see if there's even demand for the service.
Exactly. It's a low-cost way to get real-world feedback on your idea.
I like that. And then there's Wizard of Oz testing, where you essentially fake the functionality of a complex product behind the scenes. Ries gives the example of Aardvark, a question and answer service that was later acquired by Google. They actually used humans to answer customer questions in the early days, to test the concept before building the complex AI system that would eventually power it.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it's about finding clever ways to get feedback on a complex idea without having to build the whole thing first.
Precisely. And this type of testing can be incredibly valuable for validating your core product concept before you invest heavily in development.
It seems like a lot of this goes against how we're usually taught to approach new projects. Like we're always told to plan everything out in detail, have a 5-year plan, all that.
Yeah, that's the traditional way of thinking.
Huh.
But Ries makes a compelling case that when it comes to startups and innovation, a rigid plan can actually hold you back.
So instead of clinging to a plan that might be based on faulty assumptions, we should be open to changing course based on what we learn along the way.
Exactly. He uses a great analogy of tuning an engine versus steering a car.
Okay.
Imagine you're driving down the road. Tuning the engine is about making small adjustments to improve performance. Maybe tweaking the carburetor or adjusting the timing.
So making things run a little smoother, optimizing what's already there.
Right. But steering is about deciding which direction to go in the first place. Should you turn left, turn right, or keep going straight?
And in a startup, that decision is based on what you're learning from those experiments we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Regas argues that most startups are actually doing a combination of tuning the engine, steering, and even pivoting, making a significant change in direction, all at the same time.
Sounds like a lot to juggle. How do you know when to focus on which?
That's where it gets tricky. You need to be constantly making small improvements to your product, tuning that engine, but also be ready to make bigger changes to your strategy, steering, or pivoting, based on what the market is telling you.
I'm starting to see how this can be applied to so many things, not just starting a company.
Absolutely. Think about a new project at work, or even a personal goal. Are you just trying to optimize what you're already doing? Or are you open to changing direction completely if that's what's needed?
Okay, let's say I'm building something new. How do I know which direction to steer in? Where do I even begin?
One of the first things you need to figure out is what your engine of growth is going to be.
Wait, engine of growth, what does that mean?
Ries talks about 3 main types: sticky, viral, and paid. The sticky engine is all about attracting customers and keeping them engaged for the long term.
So things like social media platforms, subscription services, online games, anything that keeps people coming back for more.
Exactly. If you're using a sticky engine, you'd be focused on metrics like customer retention and engagement. How many people are sticking around and using your product regularly?
Okay, that makes sense. What about the viral engine?
That's all about getting your customers to spread the word. Think about companies like Facebook or Dropbox. They rely on word-of-mouth marketing and network effects to fuel their growth.
So the product is designed in a way that encourages people to share it with their friends.
Exactly. And finally, there's the paid engine, which is pretty straightforward. You acquire customers through advertising and other paid marketing channels.
So which engine of growth should I choose?
Well, that depends on your product, your target market, and your overall business model. Ries provides a framework for thinking through the pros and cons of each one.
So no right or wrong answer, just what makes the most sense for what you're building.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that it's usually best to pick one engine and focus on optimizing it. Trying to do all three at once can spread you too thin and lead to confusion.
This is all starting to click into place. But I have a question. How do I know if what I'm building is actually working?
That's where the concept of product market fit comes in. It's that magical moment when you've built something that meets the needs of a large enough market to sustain your business.
I've heard that term before, but how do you actually know when you've achieved it?
Ries argues that you can measure product market fit by tracking the key metrics associated with your chosen engine of growth. So if you're using a sticky engine, you'd look at customer retention and engagement. If those numbers are trending in the right direction, it's a good sign that you're on the right track.
So it's not just a gut feeling, you actually have data to back it up.
Exactly. But if those metrics are lagging, it could be a sign that your product isn't meeting customer needs or that you need to make a change.
And that brings us back to pivoting. How do you know when it's time to pivot versus persevering with your original plan?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's often one of the toughest decisions entrepreneurs and innovators face. Ries calls it the pivot or persevere decision. And it involves looking at your actionable metrics, your learning milestones, and your overall progress toward achieving product market fit.
So it's not just about whether you're making money yet, it's about whether you're learning and making progress towards your goals.
Exactly. If your key metrics are trending in the right direction and you're hitting your learning milestones, then it might make sense to persevere. But if you're not seeing the results you expected, or you're hitting roadblocks that you just can't seem to overcome, then it might be time to consider a pivot.
This is reminding me of those sunken cost fallacy examples. Sometimes it's hard to let go of something you've invested a lot of time and energy in, even if it's not working.
It's definitely a challenge. But Ries emphasizes that pivoting is not a sign of failure. It's simply a way to test a new hypothesis about your product, your market, or your business model.
So if you're hitting a wall, it might be time to take a step back and ask, what else could we be doing?
Exactly. And he provides a helpful catalog of different types of pivots. For example, there's the zoom-in pivot, where you take a single feature of your product and made it the entire product.
So instead of trying to do everything, you focus on the one thing that's resonating with users.
Right. There's also the customer segment pivot, where you change the target market for your product. He gives the example of Path, which started as a social network for sharing with hundreds of friends, but pivoted to a more intimate network for close friends and family. That helped them differentiate themselves and find a more engaged audience.
That's a really interesting example. So it's not just about changing the product, it could be about finding the right people to use it.
Exactly. And then there's the platform pivot, where you might shift from being an application to a platform or vice versa. The key is to experiment and find the combination of product, market, and business model. That achieves the best fit.
Okay, so we've made the tough decision to pivot. What happens next?
Well, once you've decided to pivot, you need to execute that pivot effectively. And one of the most important things is to communicate clearly with your team, your investors, and your customers.
So everyone understands why you're making the change and what it means for the future of the project.
Exactly. Transparency is key, especially when you're asking people to adapt to a new direction.
And I imagine you need to be ready to iterate quickly, making adjustments based on feedback as you go.
Absolutely. Pivoting is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. You might need to go through multiple iterations before you find the right path forward.
This is starting to sound like a pretty complex dance. How do you manage all of this in a real-world setting?
That's where the concept of building an adaptive organization comes in. It's about creating a company culture that embraces experimentation, rapid iteration, and learning from failure.
So it's not just about following a set of steps. It's about creating an environment where people are empowered to adapt and innovate.
Precisely. Ries argues that this kind of culture is essential for success in today's fast-paced world. He shares examples of companies like Intuit and Toyota that have successfully implemented the lean startup method, even though they're large and established.
I'm really struck by the Intuit example. It's impressive that a company that big was able to embrace this way of thinking and become more agile.
They even created a dedicated innovation catalyst role to help spread the lean startup principles throughout the organization. It's a great example of how you can build a culture of innovation, even in a large company.
But I imagine there's often resistance to change, especially in established organizations. How do you overcome that?
Ries acknowledges that it's a challenge, but he offers some practical advice. One of the most important things is to start small. Don't try to change everything overnight.
So pick one area where you can experiment with the lean startup principles and see what happens.
Exactly. If you can demonstrate success in that one area, it'll be easier to build momentum and expand the use of the lean startup method throughout the organization.
And I guess clear communication is key too.
Absolutely. People need to understand why you're making changes and how those changes will benefit them. And they need to be involved in the process.
So it's not about imposing the lean startup method from the top down. It's about creating a collaborative environment where everyone feels empowered to participate.
Exactly. And remember, patience is key. Changing a culture takes time and effort.
But it sounds like the payoff can be huge, a more agile, innovative, and successful organization.
And ultimately, a more fulfilling experience for everyone involved. When people feel empowered to contribute their ideas and experiment, it creates a much more positive and productive work environment.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from MVPs to pivoting to building a whole adaptive organization. It's clear that the lean startup is a powerful toolkit. But I'm curious about the bigger picture. What's the ultimate goal of all this?
You know what fascinates me is how Ries connects the lean startup method to the very essence of innovation. He argues that in our world today, the biggest challenge isn't producing more stuff, it's figuring out what's truly worth producing.
So it's not just about building a successful business, it's about making sure that business is actually creating something valuable.
Exactly. It's about solving real problems and meeting genuine needs, not just churning out products and services for the sake of it.
Right. I can see how that ties into the idea of validated learning. We need to constantly be testing our assumptions and making sure we're on the right track.
Right. Ries actually compares this shift in thinking to the work of Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of scientific management. Taylor was all about efficiency and optimizing the way work was done.
Which made sense in the industrial age.
Exactly. But Ries argues that in today's knowledge-based economy, our focus should be less on producing things and more on generating learning.
So instead of measuring success by how much we produce, we should be measuring it by how much we learn.
Precisely. It's about discovering what works, what's valuable, and what truly makes a difference in people's lives.
So in a way, the lean startup method is like a modern-day update to scientific management. But instead of optimizing for physical output, we're optimizing for knowledge and innovation.
I love that analogy. It captures the essence of what Ries is trying to convey.
Okay, so after diving deep into all of this, what stands out to you as the most valuable takeaway? What really clicked for you?
For me, it's the reminder that we need to be more intentional about our learning. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day grind and just focus on execution. But the lean startup encourages us to step back and ask, what are we trying to learn here? How could we test our assumptions and make better decisions?
That resonates with me too. It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity and constantly seeking feedback.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a culture of knowing to a culture of learning.
And I also appreciate the focus on building adaptive organizations. You know, it's not enough to just have a great product or service. You need to have a team and a culture that can evolve and adapt to changing circumstances.
Oh, that's so crucial. It's about embracing flexibility, experimentation, and continuous improvement. Creating a space where it's safe to fail, to learn from those failures, and to come back stronger.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the lean startup. We've unpacked the key concepts, explored real-world examples, and even touched on the philosophical underpinnings of this approach.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few key questions to ponder. Where do you see opportunities to apply the lean startup method in your own work and life?
What experiments could you run? What assumptions could you test? And how could you cultivate a more adaptive and innovative mindset in your own endeavors?
The beauty of the lean startup is that it's not a rigid set of rules. It's a flexible framework that can be adapted to any situation.
Right, so go out there, experiment, learn, and see what you can create.
That's it for this deep dive into the lean startup. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep learning and keep innovating.